This video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. Late last week, 4 of the 5 big shipping companies announced they would no longer be sailing through the Red Sea after a series of drone and missile attacks against commercial maritime traffic by the Houthis, an Iran-backed militia that controls most of northwestern Yemen. Worried about the impact on oil prices, Western navies have stepped up their presence in the region, and there's now talk of direct US intervention against Houthi bases in Yemen. So, in this video, we're going to explain why the Red Sea is so geopolitically important, why the Houthis are attacking ships in the area, and what might happen next.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
So, to understand this story, you need to understand why the Red Sea, and specifically the Bab al-Mandab Strait, is important to global shipping. Broadly speaking, there are 2 reasons. First, it's the main trade route between Europe and East Asia, including countries like Japan, China, and Vietnam. Europe and East Asia do a lot of trade, which is why something like 30% of all global container traffic goes through the strait. But second, and more specifically, it's an important trade route for oil, connecting oil-producing states around the Persian Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran, to oil-consuming states in Europe. Just take a look at this map of global maritime oil exports. As you can see, about 5 million barrels of oil, roughly 10% of the world's seaborne oil, pass through the straits every day. Since Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the accompanying disruption to Russian gas supplies into Europe, it's also become an increasingly important trade route for liquefied natural gas, coming from places like Qatar, which is one of the world's leading LNG exporters, around the Arabian Peninsula up to Europe. It's only going to become more important in the future, as Italy, France, and the Netherlands all signed multi-decade LNG contracts with Qatar in October in an attempt to replace the shortfall of Russian gas post-Ukraine. You get the idea. The Bab al-Mandab is an important global trade passage, and especially important for Europe, because it's where Europe gets a lot of its energy, and as we've learned from the past 2 years, disruptions to energy supplies can be pretty terrible for Europe's economy. In October, in response to Israel's invasion of Gaza, the Houthis started attacking trade ships passing through the strait. For context, the Houthis are a Shia Islamist militia who've been fighting a civil war against Saudi Arabia and the internationally recognized government in Yemen since 2015. With Iranian support, the Houthis have been able to establish control over a significant fraction of northwestern Yemen, including the capital Sana'a, which means the Bab al-Mandab is very much in firing range. In part because of their connection to Iran, the Houthis are fervently anti-Israel. And in October, the Houthis declared war on Israel before firing a handful of missiles north towards the Israeli port of Eilat, which were mostly intercepted. In November, after it became clear the Houthis lacked the missiles to do direct damage to Israel, they began instead attacking ships transiting through the Bab al-Mandab Strait and the Red Sea. The Houthis claim to be acting out of solidarity with Palestine, targeting ships facilitating trade with Israel, but most of the ships being attacked are neither headed to Israel nor under Israeli ownership. French, Norwegian, and even Chinese ships have all been attacked, with many of them due for Europe, not Israel. After more attacks by the Houthis in early December, including a series of drone strikes and the world's first ever anti-ship ballistic missile strike, late last week 4 of the big 5 shipping companies all said they will no longer sail through the Red Sea. In practice, this means that ships going to Europe will now have to sail around Africa, which adds something like 3,000 nautical miles to the overall journey. While this was actually pretty great news for shipping companies, it was pretty terrible news for the global economy, especially Europe. This is also bad news for Egypt, because it means fewer ships transiting through the Suez Canal, and therefore less transit fees, which will exacerbate Egypt's ongoing economic crisis. In response, over the weekend, US and UK Navy vessels started taking a more active role in the Red Sea, shooting down 15 Houthi drones on Saturday alone. So why are the Houthis doing this, given they aren't actually attacking Israeli ships, and only about 5% of Israel's trade goes through the Red Sea? Well, assuming it's not just incompetence, and the Houthis know they're not attacking Israeli ships, then there are 2 possible reasons, at least as we see it. First, it's possible the Houthis are doing this to improve their domestic image. The Houthi economy is a mess, its currency is in freefall, and public sector salaries have not been regularly paid since 2016. The Houthis might see this as their chance to cast themselves as the true protector of the Arab people, and then prove their image amongst not just the Yemeni public, but also other Arab publics, who are generally a bit disappointed by their leaders' reluctance to retaliate against Israel. Second, it's possible the Yemenis are deliberately trying to provoke an international escalation by forcing Western navies to get involved. If this is the case, then the big question is whether they've been directed to do so by Iran. Iran and its proxies have generally been pretty quiet so far, with both Iran and Hezbollah keen to stress that they didn't know about the October 7th attacks in advance. While the Houthis are more independent of Iran than Hezbollah, and so might just have to decide to do this by themselves, it's also possible Iran has decided that now is the time to strike against Israel, which would be pretty bad news for obvious reasons. So what happens next? Well, there are echoes of the so-called tanker wars in the 1980s, when during the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq began attacking container ships exporting Iranian oil in the Persian Gulf. Because Iraq exported most of its oil via overland pipelines to Turkey and the Arabian Peninsula, Iran responded by attacking ships coming out of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which were supporting Iraq at the time. In part because they were worried about the potential impact on oil prices, the US Navy started escorting ships in the region. But in 1987, an Iraqi aircraft shot down the USS Stark, killing 37 US Navy personnel. While direct escalation was avoided after both the US and Iraq said the attack was a mistake, it nonetheless demonstrates the risk of accidental escalation. But even if the Houthis don't directly attack the US Navy, if the US are unable to convince commercial tankers to resume operations in the Red Sea, Western countries could be forced to take more drastic action. There's already talk about the US taking direct action against Houthi bases in Yemen, which would both risk escalation with Iran and scupper the ongoing Saudi-Houthi peace talks.
I've been using Henson's products for a few months now, and I really do recommend them from an economic, environmental, and shave perspective. Firstly, Henson's razors take entirely standard razor blades, which means instead of being forced to buy expensive replacement blades, including features you don't even need, Henson's razors cost about 10 cents each, allowing you to replace your blades more frequently and cut down costs significantly. Now, admittedly, the razor itself may cost more than other brands, but over the lifetime of the products, it quickly becomes a lot cheaper than buying all of those expensive replacement blades. This razor model is also better for the environment, with the Henson AL13 and all of its packaging being entirely plastic-free. Plus, unlike those expensive multi-blade upsells that other companies will push, even the blades themselves are plastic-free, helping to cut down on the over 2 billion disposable razors that are thrown away every year in the US alone. Finally, Henson's beautiful razors are precision engineered by an aerospace machine company who previously built parts for the Mars rover and the ISS, which means incredibly tight tolerances, high standards, and superb precision. And all of this combined means that while a single razor blade might sound scary, I've found it far easier to use than other comparable products, with a precise shave plane of about 0.0013 inches, offering a safe and perfect shave, while also minimizing the risk of ingrown hairs and irritation. So if you too want to try out Henson, then you can get 100 free blades with your purchase by clicking the link in the description, adding the razor and the blades to your basket, and then using our code. Thanks to Henson for sponsoring this video, and to you for supporting TLDR News.